Hey, welcome everyone. Hey, this is a podcast that explores various aspects of addiction, potentially focusing on personal stories of recovery, scientific perspectives, societal impacts, or related topics. We often feature discussions with experts, individuals in recovery, therapists, and advocates to offer insights and support to those affected by addiction or seeking more information about it. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I'm your host, Al Richards. And today, with our lovely guest, we're going to be talking about I had dreams and I took full advantage of my arrest to get my life together. Please help me welcome Emily. Emily, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us.
Absolutely.
So, as I was talking before we started the show, shortly down, not too many sentences down on your bio, you talked about having dreams. So share with our listeners a little bit about just kind of beginning of your childhood and what you meant by having those dreams.
Okay. So early on, my parents were married when my mother was pregnant with me, and early on, my dad realized that my mom was not being the best parent. He was working nights, and he had found out that my mom was like leaving me and my brother at the house and going out to the bars and partying all night and everything. So at that point, my dad decided it was time to start trying to get custody of me, and they were in a custody battle. It was a pretty heavy custody battle. There was times where my mom came and abducted me from my daycare, and I was gone missing for 2 weeks. Like, it was a lot of stuff. But then on February 28th of 1990, my dad had to sit me down a couple days after that date and let me know that my mother had passed away. She was murdered. It's still a cold case to this day. Somebody had went into her home while she was asleep and poured accelerant on her, and she basically died in a house fire. Fire the fire crew couldn't get to her in time,
Oh my
and so
goodness.
she died from smoke inhalation. And so that was really hard, but that ended the custody battle for my parents. And so then my dad took me on as a full-time parent. It was my half brother, so I was my father's only child, and he did the best he could. He did the best he could as a single father. He struggled with alcoholism as well, but I mean, he taught me good values, right? I mean, the things that my dad instilled in me, I still like hold true to a lot of those values today, and I feel like it's gotten me through a lot of things. But it was really hard being raised with an alcoholic, and when I say that I had dreams, it was like even through all the hardships and all the trauma, like I was still wanted a future for myself. I wanted a future brighter than the future that I had seen my family have, right? And so I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to college and become a doctor, work in the medical field. And so all through high school, I got really good grades. I worked two jobs. I paid for all of my graduation materials and everything like that. And I had really big dreams. And because my mother passed away, I was getting Social Security benefit checks. And I was getting those for the majority of my life. And when I turned 17 and a half, I realized that I could get those checks put in my name and my name only, where it would get my dad taken off. They would come in my dad's name to Douglas Brainage for Emily Brainage. That's how the checks would come. And so when I realized at 17 and a half that I could get those checks put in my name, I went ahead and did that. And I did that because I was working two jobs. I mean, I didn't know what college looked like. I didn't know what it looked like to pay for those things, and I definitely was never taught those things because my dad he didn't go to college. And so that really upset my dad when I got my checks put in my name. But it was kind of a thing where I was trying to safeguard for myself, and my dad basically taught me these things like don't depend on anybody, work hard, do these things. And so I was trying to set myself up for things. And once I did that, it got really bad with mine and my dad's relationship. And then I had a boyfriend who caused a lot of issues within mine and my father's relationship, and it just got extremely hard. It got extremely hard for us, and it could have been that I was growing up and I was starting to look like my mother. There's so many things that I haven't got to talk to or resolve in these things. These are just ideas in my head that, like, why were things the way that they were? um, and so at the time we were living with my grandparents, and my grandparents said we need to have a family talk, and I refused to have a family talk unless my dad had not drank for the day, because there was like never getting anything through. So like, what is the point in talking to somebody who is going to be my way or the highway? And I just basically stood up for myself. And that's when I left my grandparents' house. I was still a senior in high school, and I left the house. I was just staying with friends. Obviously, I was working jobs, so I was able to pay my friends' parents like money here and there to let me stay. And it was really hard. Like, I fell into a deep depression because pretty much my entire life, I had this person, my father, who was like the most important person to me. He was my everything because I didn't have my mom. And so a lot of the things I did growing up were to try to make my dad proud of me, right? And like, I wanted, like, him to be proud of me and to do these things. And so it was just really hard when I left the house and I had that estranged relationship with my family. And a lot of it too was because I was like asking my grandma, can I have $10 for gas? And I felt really bad just asking my grandparents for like those things. And I just wanted a sense of independence. And so I fell into a deep depression. And then that's when I tried cocaine for the first time. And, you know, um, the guy who sold me the cocaine ended up boyfriending me in. And if people don't understand what boyfriending me in means, that means he made me think that he cared about me, that he loved me, that we were going to start this future and all these things. And then we ended up moving to Las Vegas together. And then as soon as I got out into Vegas, within the first few days, I was in the smallest little strip club on Las Vegas Boulevard to get my sheriff's card so I could start dancing. And then I was in strip club to strip club. And, with my heart and who I am, like, there was times where I was beaten because I borrowed another dancer some money and that was wrong. You know what I mean? And just like having to learn this whole entire different lifestyle and all these different rules, like, don't look at this person when you're walking with me, you got to look down to the ground, and all of these different things, to where then I was controlled by fear and I was controlled by violence and abuse, manipulation. I was hundreds of miles away from my family.
Yeah. So what could you do? I want to pause you for a minute, Emily. When you tried cocaine for the first time, was it just to like numb yourself away from everything that was going on? Because I remember the first time when I tried cocaine, right? It was short. And I don't know if you remember a gentleman. He was a comedian. This will tell you my age. His name was John Belushi, and he was on
Oh,
Saturday
yeah.
Night Live, and he was in Animal House. Just a very very talented man, and overdosed on cocaine, and I was so scared to do it because he just died from cocaine. But I remember when I first did it, it wasn't really for me that I had all these traumas that I was wanting to just numb myself from, until later down the road, many years later, I realized that was a part of it. Was that kind of like with you? Because gosh, you went through a ton in a very short period of your life. A young girl who has been taken advantage of, also losing their mom, dealing with an alcoholic dad, and we're still maturing, right? And not knowing which way life's going to go. Is that kind of what got you going in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, kind of, it was more, I think it was more or less like the people that I was surrounding myself around, right? Because like, I dibbled and dabbled with, I'd go hang out with my older cousin as I was a teenager and would smoke marijuana, and I would drink occasionally, right? She'd take me to a couple raves. I had tried ecstasy, you know what I mean? But the fact of the matter was that, when I left my dad's house and then I was in the home of some friends who were letting me stay there, him and his dad, and you know, um, just being in that environment. And it probably was my use to try to just numb or self-medicate. And like, these are the things, even at that age, even at 18, 19 years old, I never even knew what PTSD was. I
Yeah.
didn't know what post-traumatic stress disorder was until about 2014, when I got back to Utah and I was finally diagnosed. And so that was huge. And so a lot of the times I probably was self-medicating or just trying to forget, you know what I mean? And a lot of the times is because, you're in this house, you're in this environment, you're around these people, and that's kind of like that's kind of how, like, you survive. You know what I mean? When you're homeless, when you don't got a roof over your head, you kind of survive like that, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you have
Yeah.
drugs, you're at the house. And I just remember being in my friend's house, and I remember doing the cocaine. But and I think this was my first experience of ever seeing anybody use crack, right? And I was just like, what is that? But luckily they were like, no, you're not gonna, you know what I mean? They didn't expose me to that. And I was like really kind of still naive at that point. And so but there was like crack use and at that early age going on around me. And it was just kind of the environment and like using like that. And had gotten really sick one time and I like begged my dad to come home because I just was craving that relationship, again. So,
Yeah. And that's probably where basically you fell in as the victim, right? With this boyfriending you because he probably saw this gal that was lost, right, and confused. And it seems like from what I've understood from other guests that I've had on the show, that there's people, which is so sad, there's people that go out there and just look for those individuals to bring them into exactly what happened with you.
absolutely. I absolutely do feel that. And at the time, he was taking care of his daughter. So he was out here from Las Vegas. So in my eyes, I'm like, oh, look at this guy. He's taking care of his daughter. And I was like supportive for that, right? Because that's kind of the life that I lived. Oh, single father, taking care of his daughter, blah, 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 blah. And I feel like he kind of knew that that was kind of my background. And like, that's where I heart, like, I'm like, oh, I want to help this person out. And like, that's where it got really messy. And definitely I was vulnerable. And that's my biggest lesson to my kids today is like I don't ever want my kids to have to ever look or feel like they're in a vulnerable situation because that's what predators look for is vulnerability, to
Yeah,
take advantage
yeah.
of that.
Yeah, you were doing your best to be the rescuer in a way, right? And then turned around and which they all combined together, you ended up turning around and being the victim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, go on. You were talking about okay, you get to Vegas and you worked there. I did not realize that there was certain steps you had to take to get to certain strip clubs. That's new to me.
Yeah, in the state of Nevada, you have to have a sheriff's card, which is like basically like fingerprints or whatever to work in any of the strip clubs. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but
Okay.
so I was working from strip club to strip club, and then I was in a strip club one night. I think it was called Pussycats or something.
Okay.
But I was working in that club and this gentleman came in and he wanted to meet with me and talk with me after and I was like I didn't do anything without the permission of my pimp, you know what I mean? And so I asked my pimp one day, I was like, hey, this guy wants to meet with me and talk with me. So me and my pimp met this older white man and um, he basically told me that he had an escort service and that he had started his escort service from a client's perspective. So he was a client and then he ran a fairly decent escort service. You know what I mean? I felt like I was really safe working for him. Um, I had a good clientele. He screened his clients. He made sure that they were safe, and so I worked with him at that escort service for about 5 years. I worked maybe 3 hours a day at the most. I'd call on from 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. 7 days a week. And during that time of my life, I was probably making about $120,000 a year doing
Wow.
sex work. Yeah. So from making that amount of money and being conditioned to be this specific type of person, because when I was in Utah, before I went to Las Vegas, I was this girl. I was kind of a tomboyish like I am now. I'd wear skater shoes and all these things. But the second I got to Vegas, it was like I'm wearing high heels and I'm already 5'10". So I'm already a little insecure about wearing heels. I'm like wearing heels. Like I just was never myself out there in Las Vegas. When I went out there and I was this person, like I was really good at what I did. You know, I was really good at what I did. I was top notch, high class escort in Las Vegas. I made good money. I was really good at what I did, but I'm glad that I had a little piece of like my light shining inside of me still because I never lost who I truly was. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Um, and unfortunately, because of those years doing that sex work, I really threw away a lot of my life. You know what I mean? And it got to a point where I was doing it for him for the majority of the time, and then once I finally got away from him, got out of that relationship, and I was still stuck in Vegas. It was like that was pretty much all I knew, and then I would run into another person that you know, would kind of like, I basically started trafficking myself. You know what I mean? Because at a certain point, this is all I know. This
Right.
is all I know. I don't even, it's like I completely lost sense of every single person that I am. And now here I am 8 years later, and I'm finally getting back to that person that I knew I was able to become. Like my dreams today are finally coming true, not in the aspect that I wanted them to come true, right? But everything that I had to go through wasn't for anything now.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you said something that really resonated with me, where you said you didn't lose a certain part of you, right? You kept that light may have been very, very dim, but it was still freaking lit.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's so, I mean, I got goosebumps over here on this side because to me, that's very important because it is so easy to lose ourselves completely, right? And I've heard
Mhm.
that story, I mean, so many times doing this podcast. And I tell you, it's so hard to dig deep and find that glow again and find that heartbeat of who you really are as an individual.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
good for you, Emily, for at least
Thank you.
recognizing that and feeling that, you know. Yeah,
Mhm.
that says a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. You bet. So I remember in the bio you talked about just wanting to get the heck out of Vegas, right? Because you realized you were trapped there just because of being in the
Yeah.
industry as long as you happened to be down there. I mean, we say here in Salt Lake, it's, you know, small lake city. I'm sure it was almost like that in Vegas, right? You're always running into somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like, I guess I didn't really run into like a lot of people, but I'm going to say that a lot of the people that I was associating myself with in Las Vegas were not the best of people, right? And
Okay.
there were like relationships. There was a lot of heartache, especially in the sex work, in the sex industry. I had one abortion willingly in my time in Las Vegas, and then I was forced to have two other abortions. And when I say forced, I mean I was with an individual. We found out that I was pregnant, and he had been in prison numerous times and was like an Aryan warrior in prison and all these things. And I had a biracial son at the time when we met, and so I was like really apprehensive about that. But it was like almost like me having my biracial son kind of changed his way of thinking, and like he accepted me and my son and all these things. But we were like, I was after when I got pregnant with my son, I was involved in two vice stings before I got pregnant with my son, and I was involved in one vice sting after I had my son. And that's when I realized. And the guy I was dating, the pimp, was like, you take these charges for me and I'll raise your kid. And I was like, hold the hell up. Ain't nobody going to be raising my kid for me. I'm not taking charges for no man. But that's really the mentality. And there's really women out there that will fall down for these people like that. And for me, it was like, no, I'm not. Like, I could have allowed that to happen to me, but I'm like, no, I'm not falling down for anybody but me. You know what I mean? I'm going to stand for something, and I'm never going to fall for anything, you know? And that's what I always stood for something, you know what I mean? And so once I was arrested with that arrest, I just told myself, I said, man, I've got to get out of this. I cannot do this. I don't want my son to be raised thinking it's okay to beat women, to make women go out there and sell themselves. I want my son to respect me as a mother, as a woman. All these things were flooding my head. And so it got to a point where I was like, this is enough. And I didn't know what any of this looked like. I didn't know what food stamps looked like. I didn't know what financial assistant looked like, but I had to figure that out on my own out there in Las Vegas. And I did those things. And just with that little bit amount of money, food stamps and a little bit of financial aid, I was able to basically couch surf for the first 4 years of my son's life until I was able to escape from Las Vegas. And when I say couch surf, I was able to, buy a little dope here and stay at somewhere where I felt safe, where it was safe environment for my son. I wasn't in like trap houses with him, Like, I have a boyfriend who lives at home with this elderly grandma, and you know what I mean? Things like that.
Yeah.
And it was a lot. And then I met this guy, Derek, and I was like, oh man, but he accepted me, and I lived with him for a long time, and I really cared about him a lot. But man, that guy on meth, he's not a good person on meth. You know what I mean? And when I found out that I was pregnant with his kid, um, he basically told me that he had a tarp in his mom's backyard and that I'd be fucking found in the desert.
Oh,
Um,
geez.
he took a pistol, he shot the pistol right by my fucking head in his mom's bedroom. And when I say I'm forced, like I probably did have a choice in doing those things, but when you're literally being controlled by fear like that and abuse, it's terrifying. And so I did end up following through with that abortion. And when I say that like I am truly blessed and I'm grateful to be able to be here to tell my story today. Like his last girlfriend wasn't so lucky and he shot and killed her in that same room that he shot that gun past me. And so when I see these things happening later on in my recovery, and I've spoke to him, he's apologized to me for these things in the past and since I've been in my recovery, but now he's obviously in prison and he's not ever going to get out. But the fact of the matter is that I've always kept that light inside of me and I've always trusted my gut. I've always trusted my feeling, and I've stayed in a lot of abusive situations. I've stayed in a lot of situations, but there were some points where it was like I knew I had to get out. I knew I had to find an escape plan or else I was going to end up dead just like my mom. And as I got closer and closer to the age of 28, which is the age my mom was murdered, that was like the area, that was like the time frame where it was like I was in the most abusive type of things, And so it was really scary. But I got myself out of that.
Again, you said it a couple more times again. It's that light that was inside you, right?
Mhm.
Because we got to hang on to something about us, right? We know what's right and wrong. Maybe not so much as kids growing up and we start figuring some things out, and life is always throwing shit balls at us, right? I mean, that's what helps us grow. Life is always going to throw shit balls at us because we have to learn lessons and move forth. But man, with as many as being thrown at you and still to have you inside and knowing what it was. I mean, what I'm hearing is you definitely saved your own life because of you kept that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I could have went through life. I could have went through life and being like, because I know my dad was really upset with me, and mine and my dad's relationship was really estranged. But my grandparents took a big part in helping raise me too, right? So even being in Las Vegas, like I knew growing, like I had a decent childhood growing up, right? I mean, the murder of my mother, I was sexually assaulted that same year, and I didn't tell anybody about that until later on. And even when I did tell somebody, it wasn't like I went and seen somebody one time and then that was it. You know what I mean? So I kind of had to deal with that. And that explains a lot of to why of the sexual trauma explains a lot of to why now that I understand it all of why I went around the route that I did and I allowed people to do the things that you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so yeah, but my grand like just knowing in my heart that there were people out there that cared about me, that loved me, and I was just trying to find my way back to them. Uh I would beg. I'm like, when my after my son was born, I'd ask my grandparents, please, I just need some money to get back to Utah. And I remember them telling me one time, they're all, we'll help you get back to Utah, but we need to talk to your dad and let your dad let us know that you'll have a place to stay when you get back out there. And I said, he ain't gonna let me stay with him. I said, and I was like so sick to the point where I was like, I don't care if I have to live in a shelter. I just want to come. Like I was like trying to get out of that. I was like the devil's playground. It didn't matter. Even, you know what I mean? Even when I shaved all my hair off and I didn't wear makeup because I was trying to get out of the industry, I still ran into somebody who has abused me and manipulated that situation and took, you know what I mean? And throwing my past in my face and stuff. And it got so much to where I was I was not in the most safest places, and my son's father, at least him and his girlfriend had an apartment, right? Whether he was going out and she was selling herself at night and he was selling drugs, at least they had a roof and it was more stable. So at a point I asked my son's father if my son could go stay with him. And this is the man that I left him at the first doctor's appointment because he told me he wanted me to have an abortion because he didn't want any baby mama drama. I left him at that doctor's appointment. I didn't ask him for anything the whole entire pregnancy, but I still was trying to allow him to have those times with his son, right? Even after the fact. But it got to a point where my son was staying there and I was like, I'm going to have to call child protective services on my own kid because they're neglecting my son. And I just felt so trapped. I was like using meth and then my son wasn't there and I was so depressed. Like, you know what I mean? And that just wasn't working for me. It just wasn't working for me. I was just like so sick and I was so tired of fighting. Like I was getting tired. I was getting tired of fighting. I was getting tired of pushing my bike down Henderson Boulevard or whatever, with a trailer with all my shit on it, and you know what I mean? Like my body was physically tired, my mind was tired, and it came to a point where I was like, I'm gonna go see if they've auctioned off my storage unit, right? Because that happened numerous times. There are so many, I can't even count on two hands how many times I've gained everything, lost everything, gained everything, lost everything, you know? And there's things that I will never get back, like a baby blanket my mom made for me, a bunch of pictures, like a lot of things that I had that I've lost in storage units that I'll never get back. You know what I mean? Loss, gain, loss, gain. And I just went to go see, well, did they sell this storage unit off? And I went in there, it was nighttime, and something told me to look in this U-Haul truck. And so I looked in the U-Haul truck and I seen the keys sitting right there. And I was like, oh. So I came back later with the hood. I was like, okay, I'm gonna come back with the hood over my head. You know what I mean? And I grabbed those keys. I grabbed those keys and I drove that U-Haul truck around Las Vegas for about a week and a half. I was like, I knew somebody that was moving. I was like, oh, I'll let me rent you this truck, because I was trying to make some money for gas, or make some kind of money to get out of there, you know? And then I got to a point where I was like, 2 weeks had gone by. I was fucking still using drugs. I wasn't doing anything. 2 weeks had went by. I'm still weighing on me, like, I need to protect my child. I need to protect my child, you know? And so I just made the call to Melvin, my son's father, and I said, hey, can I come get Caden, because my friend's having a birthday party for a son and it's a sleepover and we're going to do a sleepover and stuff. He's like, oh, yeah, come get him. I went and got him. I didn't have none of his clothes, none of his shoes. I didn't have nothing. I got my son. And right after I got him in that thing, I think I stopped at one place on Las Vegas Boulevard for a quick second. And then I just hit I-15 and I put $50 in gas in that U-Haul truck. $50 isn't going to get me very far.
No, no, not at all. Maybe to
So the
St.
very first,
George.
yeah. So the first gas station, I think it was like the the one on the Indian reservation where you can buy fireworks and stuff right out of Las Vegas. I stopped there, told my story, told people what I was trying to get away from, and I was blessed the entire way back to Salt Lake City, Utah. In that stolen U-Haul truck, people giving me money. Stayed at my dad's house for one night when I got back, and then when they woke up the next morning and found out the U-Haul truck was stolen, they laid into me pretty hard and told me to get the fuck out. And then I tried to call my grandparents, and my dad had already called my grandparents before I could call them, and they weren't very supportive of what had happened either. But at the same time, like, I don't blame my grandparents. Like, I don't blame my family. I don't blame any of them for how they were reacting towards me when I got back out here, because I was extremely dysfunctional. I was extremely riddled with trauma. I wasn't making the best choices. I probably spoke at a rate of like 80 miles an hour, because in Vegas, everything is fast. And that's like, you know what I mean? Like, my family would be like, what did you just say? Slow down, you know? And so I wasn't mad that my grandparents were like, yeah, you need to go to the homeless shelter. They didn't know what I had been going through. Nobody in my family had really known what I was going through for 12 years. There were numerous times where I'd come and meet them, or I'd come back to Utah for vacations, and they probably thought that everything was okay, but I just didn't know how to tell anybody what I was actually dealing with, you know?
Yeah.
So,
You know, so basically when you said that you was working, you made about $120,000 a year. I mean, that's some really good money, right? And so a lot of that money was just life and also just partying. I mean, because we don't make good choices, right, when we're under the influence, and
mhm,
we could have been putting money away or investing or whatever. However,
mhm.
our vision is totally different.
Yeah. So, and that's what kind of breaks my heart in the situation. Because I feel like if I would have had more control over the money that I was making, that I would have been able to do a lot greater things. I will say that in that time when I worked for Bruce, was his name, when I worked for, the service was called Pretty Maids All in a Row. When I worked for that service and I was working 3 hours a day, making over $120,000 a year, I rarely used drugs during that period.
Oh, wow.
I'd
Okay.
make myself a mixed drink before I leave just to loosen myself up. Um, I feel like when I was in the strip clubs for that time period, because my guy was like sending me into the strip clubs with meth to try to sell to the girls. So I was like dibbling dabbling with meth when I was in the strip club. But then once I got to the escorting, like that pretty much stopped. Like I had like I'd have a drink. Like that was my big thing. I'd have a drink before I went to a call, just one drink. I wouldn't have like fucking numerous drinks. I just have one drink to kind of lose some up my nerves and stuff like that. And if it was a client, like a repeat client or somebody that I knew that was like partying that I felt safe around, like using cocaine, I would occasionally use cocaine with my clients. But for me, I was very strict with my rules, with how I performed business. I was always safe. I always used protection. And 9 out of the 10, like the majority of the times when clients wanted to party and use drugs, I would basically like fake, like act like I'm sorting the line, but blow the line off the table
Yeah.
just to party and engage with them. You know what I mean? But
Okay.
for the most part, I knew that like I was never taken advantage of in the industry. I was never raped, or like there was times where clients tried to take my money back or tried to intimidate me by violence or by, you know what I mean? But I will have to say that I've never in the industry, I never really experienced like a bad experience, like somebody raping me or something like that. That's because I made sure to keep my mind clear, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And that was such a smart decision because I've talked to other people who, I mean,
Mhm.
basically that's what they had to do to get themselves through their
What
work,
they were doing. Yeah.
right? And I watched a documentary on that too. They were talking about like a lot of women that are in the porn industry that, you know, they would smoke just to get themselves through
Mhm.
whatever it was that they're going through. And it's crazy now because the industry is pretty much ran by women now,
Mhm.
in all honesty. But so you end up coming back to Salt Lake. Your dad, your grandparents, nobody wants anything to do with you. What's your next move?
So when I did drive back out to Salt Lake, I had started dating this guy who he actually lived in an apartment below the father of my son. And so I kind of like was talking to him because like, hey, now I'm gonna have inside of what's really going on with my kid, you know? And me and him were dating and he was kind of young, but he ended up coming back to Salt Lake with me in the U-Haul truck, right? And so we were
Okay.
together, you know, we were at the road home shelter. So it was me and him, and I wasn't using, and we were doing fairly good and all this stuff. And then we started meeting with the missionaries, the LDS missionaries. And I think it was like July 5th. I don't even remember the date because I don't care, but the missionaries ended up marrying me and Taz. We ended up getting married. Um, and forgive my heart because I was really messed up at that time, right? I was really messed up. I was a really messed up person and I didn't know right or I didn't know what I was doing. I was so filled with trauma and I probably
Yeah.
wasn't the best person to him, you know? But one day he's like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And he hopped off the top bunk at the shelter with the roll of toilet paper. And that was the last I had seen of him. He got on a bus, went back to Las Vegas because his grandma, you know, calling me the white devil and da 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 and all these things. And but he ended up going back to stay with his grandma and you know I don't know what was going on out there. She had him start selling pills or doing this doing that, but he ended up committing an armed robbery and like basically shut down schools and all these things, and he ended up doing a prison term. So here I am now, I'm married, and then he got taken away and I'm just like just trying to survive. But like the marriage, like that's there, so we'll talk about that later. The marriage is there, and so I'm just like at the shelter. And my aunt owns Club 90, and so at that time she was like, I was going down there and I was working as like a bar back on the weekends and stuff, so I was somewhat functional. You know what I mean? I was somewhat functional, but I just couldn't get housed. So I'm like working at Club 90 and then getting my son from there and going back to the family shelter at night, trying to get housed. Da, da, da. It was like housing never came through when I was doing that, you know? And it was just a cycle. It was just a cycle of using, and I was dating this guy and we'd fight and then I'd go here. And I'm like, I just didn't want to live like that anymore, you know? And my grandparents had helped me get a car in this time period. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to make a payment on the car, and I'm like, Grandma, Grandpa, I had tax invasion, and so my taxes haven't came through, and like I'm just giving you more time, you know. And they're all, well, no, we've given you enough time, and I don't know, like if I was just not believable, like my word wasn't credible then, you know. We don't. I was like, okay, whatever, take the car back, and it was like literally probably a day later that I had got my taxes. Okay. And I was like, okay, that's BS. And in this period, I had went and got my concealed weapons permit too. And so when I got that tax money back and I didn't have the responsibilities of being able to give the money for the car, I went right to the gun store and I purchased a gun. Not for anything crazy, but just because I believe in my Second Amendment rights. And I'm like, but it's like in my head, I'm like still using, but I'm like, I believe in my, it's like, I still like, I always had that part of me that's like, I'm a decent person inside. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
person inside and so I did that and I was going into the family shelter and I'd have my gun on me and I was like had a little bit of dope here because I was like basically just using it to self-medicate, but then I would like sell a little bit here and there just to get by, to support my own habit, that type of lifestyle. And then one day my son's daycare called and was like, hey, he's sick. And so I asked my grandpa to come pick us up. My grandpa picked us up. He dropped us off at 5400 South at the hospital. And I had given my son some ibuprofen, some children's ibuprofen, and he seemed to have been feeling better because he was like scooting around on his scooter. And I was like, okay. I was like, we'll just go back to the shelter. I said, if you start feeling bad later, we'll leave and I'll take you to the hospital, right? Just trying to self-monitor it. So we got on the tracks and we rode the tracks from 5400 South all the way up to downtown by the Gateway Mall where the shelter was at, the road home.
Mhm.
Got off there. I had a little suitcase on me. Normally I would have my drugs in my bra or something, but this day I'm just like with my son, had all my stuff in a little suitcase and just walked around the corner. The police were across the street with their lights on. And as soon as I come around the corner and I was walking down a little bit towards the gateway, for some reason, the police car came right across the tracks, swooped right up to me, and apprehended me there. They were like, we have reason to believe you have a large amount of narcotics on you. I was like, whoa, right? I'm like, okay. But I'll tell you, I didn't have my gun on me when I got arrested for my drugs. That's because 7 days before I was arrested for my drugs, I had got a motel room down in Sandy just for the night because my son was in a charter school. So I would get up every morning from the road home shelter and ride the train for an hour, then walk basically an hour, half the time carrying my son because his name got drawn in a lottery for kindergarten at a charter school. And education has always been super important to me, right? So I'd get up and I'd make that trek every day, get on there, and it would take like 2.5, 3 hours just to get my kindergartner to a charter school, And so when that day, like 7 days before my drug arrest, I was at the hotel room. I had my gun on my hip. It wasn't concealed or anything. I was talking to the lady at the desk. She was treating me like I was a piece of shit. And mind you, that's how when people look at people and they think, hey, that person's probably on drugs, they probably treat them like in some kind of way. But me, I was like, you don't get to fucking treat me like this. You know what I mean? She's like, then she seen the gun on my hip and she got scared. And I said, yes, go call the cops. Cause I knew I was, you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
wasn't,
Yeah.
I'm like, go call the cops. I said, I need to get my kid to school. Like, go call him. And just to make her feel like I wasn't a threat, I took my gun off. I took the clip out. I disengaged, and I just set it up there. I said, I'm going to get my family. But in that instance, when I took my gun off of my hip right there, that's where I was wrong. And the police ended up taking my gun from me, charging me with disorderly conduct and removing my gun and putting it evidence. They were like, you have 1 year to get this out of evidence, right? I looked up in the sky that day and I said, this is God's way of telling me that something bigger is about to happen. And it was 7 days later that I was arrested on the drugs. A few weeks prior to all of this happening, I had wrote in a journal how I just was done with the drugs. I just wanted my life to change. I wanted to get clean. I didn't want to live like this anymore. So it was like a series of events. Like I put it in the universe. God protected me by taking that gun. And then he saved my life by giving me that arrest. When I had to sit down on that curb, and I'm grateful that the police didn't put me in cuffs in front of my child. He was 4.5 years old. I sat on that curb and I looked at my son and I told my son, I said, Caden, I said, mommy is really sick. And I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get better. And I'm going to get back to you. And those are the words that I said to my son. And I've watched so many women get their kids back and do the same thing that they did to their kids the first time to lose their kids. And it's this repeat cycle. And with my son only having me, I needed to show my son at that point what he meant to me. And I worked hard. And within 7 months, I had full custody of my son back.
Mm.
The things that I had to do with DCFS's requirements and court and all these things, all of these things that I was required to do, a lot of the things I still do today. I don't go to a drug treatment program because I've graduated that, but I go to meetings. I'm involved. I'm in service work. You know what I mean? Like I know and I understand that I'm going to be a woman who's going to be in recovery for the rest of my life. And if I'm not working on my recovery, then I'm not going to be whole. But my son, literally, he is the one that literally saved my life and gave me everything to fight for. That arrest, I remember, like, the police let me make one phone call. Why would you, after they let me make one phone call, they said, why would we let you make any other phone calls to some of your drug addict friends to come and get your son? They treated me like that. The first phone call was to my grandpa, who had just dropped me and my son off. You know what my grandpa told the officers? He told them that they were going out of town and they couldn't come get my son. So my son went into foster care. And I requested DCFS. I said, whatever you do, don't take my son out of that school. And within the first week of it was like 3 days, the DCFS worker came into the jail and told me, one, we placed your son in a foster home with two dads. And I was extremely homophobic at that point in my life. I didn't understand. I didn't understand what any of this process looks like. DCFS, foster care, da da da. You hear all these horror stories, and I was like, how is this even happening? But those two guys, they literally took the best care of my son. Like they did me a service, right? There was a point where they missed a phone call. I'm waiting for my son to call me, and I don't get a phone call. I was an advocate for myself through my entire case. I was an advocate, but it was easy to be an advocate for myself when I knew I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing. And I let DCFS know, I said, I'm going to let you know this right now. If I was to miss one drug test, you guys would be really quick to come in and take my kid from me. And you need to let those guys know that that's my kid and I'm coming back for him. Because I feel like they wanted, to probably keep him or adopt him for themselves. I was like, no, this is not happening and you better let it know. And I was an advocate for myself the entire time, And there's a lot of things that I get to do today because I've walked that path for the last 8 years of recovery.
That light kept on burning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it got brighter and brighter. I mean, you had tears in my eyes when you were talking about sitting on the curb and and looking at your son at 4.5 years of age. That's just, this is what I love about doing these shows, right? I'm a very spiritual type person, and my whole family's LDS, and I was in the church. I got out of the church about the age of 13, and I dabbled back in it a little bit because my grandma, when she was her health started to go, she's like, I sure wish you'd go back. And, and I went back just because I wanted her to know that, to put a smile on her face, knowing that her oldest grandson was going back to church. And the spirituality of things, no religion in with this. I've said this on the show a few times, when Jesus first started going out to spread the word, he didn't pick the perfect ones, he picked the imperfect ones. Absolutely. And I can get emotional even talking about this because it's individuals like yourself, Emily, that I believe are the angels now that's out walking this world in all around the world, right? Not just here in the US, it's all around the world that are out there making changes. And it's because they lived a certain life, whatever that may be, because it's different for all of us, right? What was traumatic for you may not be traumatic for someone else, right? But it's our own journeys, and it's our freaking stories, and to be able to dig ourselves out of the cesspools, basically out of the shit, and to make something of our lives and still believe on who we are. So What I've heard throughout this whole interview here and listening to your story, I don't think you ever lost love for yourself. You may have not loved yourself at a certain time to the consent that you do now, but you never lost it. That's what kept that light burning,
Mhm.
and you had your son after having these other abortions. That little guy was meant to be in your life to help you down the road.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, uh, the one abortion that I was forced with Derek, that came after my son was born, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think after giving birth to my son, I don't think I would have ever have, like, I knew what that was, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I definitely, when my son's father wanted me to have an abortion and told me that, I was like, no, like, something inside of me just told me, like, this is going to change my life. This baby is going to change my life. And I don't need anybody else to do it. And I was homeless. I didn't have anywhere to go. You know what I mean? It was scary, but I've done it. And my son is 13 years old now. And like education has always been huge for me, like even in my addiction, and my son, he's extremely bright, and I nurture that with him, and he's about to start high school and already be doing like he's already doing honors classes, and he's gonna, you know what I mean, like he's gonna be so far ahead more than I was, and that's because I get to be present in his life today. you know my dad, he did the best he could for me, but man, if he wasn't drinking his life away and an alcoholic, he probably could have done a lot more for my life, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not mad at him about that. I'm grateful that I get to have the experience, that I get to give my kids something more than what I ever had. And recently in August, my father passed away. He passed away from his disease, basically. Um, I know that he passed away, and I know that he was proud of the woman that I have become. I got married again in 2021 after getting divorced to Taz, and I went and bought my dad clothes to come to my wedding and walk me down the aisle, and my dad didn't come. So there's a lot of things that my dad didn't show up for towards the end. And I know that he was really struggling with his addiction. I was grateful that I got to go over and see him a few days before he passed away. And I know that he was trying to see what I was doing, right? Because he'd call my grandparents and ask my grandma, well, what's Emily doing with her life? Because he never seen for himself what I was doing in the last 8 years. But I know that he passed away happy with what I'm doing with my life. And my uncle was living in the house, and this my dad's living in this house that's paid off. It was my grandparents' house, this, that, and the other. And so when my dad passed away, it was really hard. Like, I don't even think at this point in March, I don't even feel like I've had an opportunity to grieve my father, because there's a lot of things that, like, childhood stuff that I wanted to work out, but I don't ever get to. But just the fact that the way that my uncle has attacked me since my father's death, throwing my past in my face, not holding, like, my story is my story. And if you weren't around for my story, you don't get to tell me what happened or tell me how things were. And so that was a huge, huge battle. But today, like, I am a homeowner today now. So those dreams that I thought were so far gone for myself, and like, I've literally sat here thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm gonna have to work my ass off for the rest of my life just to get the bare minimum. And I'm probably after my arrest and getting my son back, I was granted Section 8 reunification housing because I was chronically homeless before that. So I've been living on the Section 8 voucher, just trying to, like, build my credit and do the right thing and get education and, like, not take advantage of it, but utilize it for what it's there
Yeah.
for. You know what I mean? And my dad passed away, and he may have been telling my uncle, I'm going to put your house or your name on the house. But my dad was also telling me that, right? My dad, towards the end of life, he was like, I want to get your name put on this. That way you and the kids can live here. You don't got to pay any rent. Da, da. Well, it never ended up happening like that. So it came down to where I've been in this extreme court battle and had to pay thousands of dollars. But at the end of the day, today, 8 years in recovery, me thinking that I was going to have to work my ass off just to have a little bit of piece of the cake. I'm a homeowner today. I just went and signed on a HELOC loan today. I get to show up for my kids today. I get to coach junior jazz for my son. Like, I get to do so many amazing things. I get to show up for other people in recovery. I get to be involved in numerous recovery organizations like Addicts Fighting Back, the Free Riders of Utah. Like, I just love being involved and I love giving back, and I just love my life today.
Wow. Good for you. I mean, this could be like one of those Hollywood movies, right? That it goes to show that it's never too late. And it doesn't matter how old you are in all seriously, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, it doesn't matter because you kept those dreams alive too. That's another thing, right? So many times we allow our egos and our brains to take over and the opposition to take over our minds and doubt us, as well as other people's voices, right? Whether it's family member or friends or whatever it may be. And as long as we believe what it is we want to do, and as long as we have that desire, and we can accomplish anything. I mean, God didn't make us to be stupid.
Yeah,
I mean, right? He made us to be
absolutely.
very intelligent beings, and
Mhm.
it's up to us where we want to use that. And it breaks my heart to see individuals that they give up so easy, right? It's like they say if a wolf is chasing a sheep, the sheep it won't try to outrun the wolf. It'll just lay down and just say, take me, right? It just
Mhm.
gives up like that.
Yeah.
And there's another thing too is I'm in some training myself, and we were talking about the story about the two wolves, right? And it's like, which one do you want to feed? And it's that story about the Indian, and he's talking to his son, and they're talking about the right and the wrong, and they're using the wolf as, the example, and he's like, well, which one do I become? And he goes, it depends on which one you want to feed, right? You
Yeah.
want to feed the black one that's full of misery and anger, or you want to feed the white one where it does different things, so yeah.
I think that's a good analogy, because I think, like, with anything that a person can go through, I feel like it's our own inner self and our own inner thoughts and our own inner reaction of to the situation of, like, where that's going to take us. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to thank for being able to have the mind or the mentality that I have, because it's kept me safe, right? I've never given up on myself. Like you said, like, I've never laid down and died. Like, I'm not that type of a person. And I'm super grateful that I have a strong enough mind to where the things that I've been through haven't, like, triggered me so far out to where I couldn't get that mind back. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like super blessed to be able to be as strong as I am. And, at the same time, it's hard sometimes. It's hard sometimes to be as strong as I am, right? Because there's been, like, a lot of times through this whole entire process with my house and with things like with things like that have been really scary and unknown to me, and I'm, like, terrified, and I'm like, it's like eating me alive inside. And I tell people, I'm like, I'm really going through it, and people are like, it's okay, you'll get through this, you're strong. That's what everybody says to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's that thing, and, like, I'm grateful. I'm like, oh, thank God you're reminding me that I am strong. Like, I got this. Like, I'll never have to be like, like, suicide never been a thought in my head. No matter how bad things got, to take my life was never, because to me my life has been important always, even when you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's sad that some people's minds aren't as strong like that, and that some things can really tear them down. I don't know what it is, why my mind is built like this, why I've been able just to let things roll off of me and just keep moving forward. But it's been like that since I was 7 years old at my mom's funeral. And I was there, and my dad and my brother were crying. And I don't know if it was because that experience at an early age of death, or, you know what I mean? I don't know what it's been, but I've managed to get through in life, and it's been great. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. I can definitely see why. And
Yeah,
another amazing thing that has come out of this, you broke the chain, right? You
absolutely.
broke that freaking chain to where your son doesn't have to stay connected to it, you know?
Absolutely. And in the process of it, the 3 abortions that I got, I feel like it all comes around full circle. So in 2021, I did get married to my husband, Nick. In December of 2020, I had another baby. So I have a 3-year-old daughter now. She was
Wow.
planned. She was planned. I decided to take my IUD out and have a baby, which was a huge decision for me, given the past things that I had gone through, But she's been the most amazing thing in my life. And then shortly after we had her, um, my husband, who had an estranged relationship with his kids for about 8 to 9 years because of his addiction as well, they both entered into our home, and we now have full permanent custody of both of his kids.
Oh my gosh. Look at these blessings pouring in.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like the things that I had went wrong, I feel like I'm getting the opportunity to make right with those things, right? Like I feel like when I do so much service work, people are like, "Oh, you do so much service work. You do so much service work." I'm like, "Yeah, I got to do all this service work. I got to give back. I got to give back because I took. I took. I took from you. You know what I mean? When I look
Yeah.
at those things, I'm like, I took from poor wives. I took from poor wives because their husband wanted to come pay me for sex. I took from, you know what I mean? And so in my mind, it's like, it's a give and take thing. It's like, I got to make right with the things. And that's why I'm of service. It's like, I enjoy being of service. I enjoy giving my time away for free because there was a point in my life where you couldn't even look at me without paying me. And I was an ugly person. I hated who I was inside. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It makes me feel good to be able to show up for people, show up in a capacity where I can actually show up and do something good for them.
Man, good for you. Good for you. I can see why Janan said I needed to get a hold of you. And I just want to say thank you to Janan, for basically bringing you to my attention because this is just another amazing story. I love the days I get to do these podcasts, right? Because I get to meet so freaking amazing individuals, and these are people that I know that are always going to be there for others. And it's because of what they went through, right? Because
Mhm.
service
Absolutely.
definitely means a lot to all of them, right?
Mhm.
And it's because of what they've gone through in their life, and now they're doing their best to put their hands out and go, here, if you would like me to, I'll help you, right? Because this, we have to do it on our own, right? No one can make us do anything we don't want to do,
Mhm.
or they can't. If we don't want to recover ourselves, no one can make us do that. We have to dig deep inside ourselves, and whatever that may be, because one day we got to drop that shovel. Because, and I'm sure you would probably agree with this, you know. I've asked people when I first started doing this show, so you hit rock bottom. They're like, oh no, there's another one. Oh, so that was your rock bottom. Oh no, no, there's another one. Right. And there's constantly another rock bottom till you decide to drop that damn shovel.
Absolutely.
Because when you think the worst is hitting the worst, there's another worse below that.
Yeah. And I think for me, like I don't think I knew what resources were out there. I don't think I knew how to get the help, right?
Yeah.
And the help came in the form of an arrest. And I just remember being in jail and I was so distraught that my son, because I'm like, he doesn't have anybody. I don't got anybody. And they're all, don't worry, you're gonna get housing. You're gonna get housing because of this. And I was just like, okay, like that was like kind of like kept me sane in jail. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get housing. Everybody's saying I'm gonna get housing, and that is what had happened. You know what I mean? But scary, scary
Yeah.
situation.
Well, and how would you know what's out there? Because you're living a whole different life, right? I mean, it's easy to be naive about this other stuff because you've never done it, right? That would be like me going, okay, well, I'm going to start up an electrical business when I don't know shit about electrical,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
if you don't know anything about that, how could you start anywhere?
Exactly. I felt like I did my part when I stole the U-Haul and I got back to Utah. I got back to somewhere where I knew. Like I was, you know what I mean? But everything
Yeah,
else after that, I was like, dang, like I wish that, some people, I wish maybe my family or people would have known a little bit more and were able to step in at a different pace. But at the end of the day, like my story is my story and I'm grateful for my story. Like I'm so grateful for that arrest. I'm grateful for the experience. I'm grateful for House of Hope, being able to go to treatment there, knowing that I can always go back there, knowing I'm an alumni. You know what I mean? I can go to aftercare at House of Hope every Wednesday. Like I was grateful to be a part of a family, it was called family dependency drug court at that time. You know what I mean? Grateful to be a part of that. They were like, why do you want to be? I'm like, because I just want to be a part of anything that's going to help me be better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm willing to do the work. Like, if you're showing me what I need to do, I'm willing to do the work. So,
Emily, good for you, man. I mean, yeah, you're amazing. You really are, and it's a blessing, and I hope that I get to see you around because I go to recovery events as well, and I've met
absolutely.
again some of the most amazing people who today I call friends. Right? It's we may not go out and hang out and do things together. However, I know if
Mhm.
I see them somewhere, the hugs are right there. How's you doing? Life is great. You know, that to me that's a good friend as well. You know, so I
Absolutely.
hope to see you around. So couple last questions. What what would you like our listeners to gain from your story, and what would be your main message?
I think you kind of tapped on it when we're talking about the light, but my message is to no matter what journey you're on, take the journey to learning how to love yourself. Because if you build that self love, nobody will be able to knock you down. That's my most important message. And love yourself.
I love that. That's perfect. That is perfect. Because how many of us out there that may not even be battling an addiction, right? May be battling something else, and it's
Absolutely.
because we don't love ourselves, right? We cannot project love on other people unless we have it within us already.
Absolutely.
That's my version of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Emily, oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us today. I'm so grateful and again so blessed to have got to know you a little bit better and know your story and thank you for what you are doing. I mean,
Absolutely. Thank
seriously,
you.
thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, guys, again, thank you to all our guests, past guests, all our listeners. You guys are the ones that are making this possible. I say this every week, and I will continue to say this every week. This show is successful because of you guys. We're going to leave you with this as we do at the end of every show. Remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.